Hello everyone and welcome. Today I'm going to talk about Uruguay, the country in South America, and I'm going to share with you 8 interesting points about this brilliant, fascinating country. So Uruguay has a population of 3.5 million and is a really friendly, welcoming country and is known as a kind of hidden gem in South America. It uses the Uruguayan peso for its currency, but like a lot of countries in Spanish-speaking South America, you can use the American dollar also sometimes. And recently, Uruguay's been in the news quite a lot because of the situation of the coronavirus. They've had a very low level of cases in the country, and they've had just 28 deaths so far. So they've managed it really well. I've been to the country twice myself. I've been there just to Montevideo, which is the capital city, but there are other really interesting places to visit in Uruguay, like Punta del Este, which is a beach resort. So the first point I want to talk about is the language in Uruguay. So Spanish is the official language, but they actually speak a specific dialect called Español Rioplatense, or River Plate Spanish. And this refers to the River Plate, which is a region in South America. And actually the geographical location of Uruguay is at the mouth of the River Plate. And they have certain words that are different, but the main thing that you'll notice is that the accent is very different. So if you've been to Spain and you speak Spanish, you'll notice that they have a very different accent. It's almost like a dialect. And this is because they had a lot of influence from Italian migrants who moved to South America, and it influenced the language and the culture. Another interesting point about River Plate Spanish is that they use the word vos instead of tú, which means you. So for example, if we look at this phrase, in Iberian Spanish it's tú eres simpático, which means you are nice. And in River Plate Spanish, it would be vos sos simpático. So they have some different grammar structures as well as a different accent. So one example of different vocabulary that they have in Uruguay is the word for a strawberry, this thing. So in Iberian Spanish, they call it una fresa, and in Uruguay, it's una frutilla. And this is also interesting because you can see the pronunciation is slightly different. So in Castilian Spanish they would pronounce this frutilla, but River Plate Spanish it's una frutilla. That's something that you need to be aware of when you go to Uruguay, is that the accent is slightly different, but like any world language, they have regional variations in different parts of the world where it's spoken. Another really interesting fact about Uruguay is that in the border region with Brazil in the north, up to 100,000 people speak something called Fronterizo, which is actually a mix of Portuguese and Spanish and is also known as Portuñol. And this is because there's an open border between Brazil and Uruguay, and therefore this dialect has developed over time. So the second point I want to talk to you about is the gastronomy in Uruguay and the cuisine. So the food in Uruguay is really nice. They have delicious food. And also one of the main points about Uruguayan cuisine is the barbecue. So they have amazing barbecues in the country. And one thing that's different from other places like Brazil or Argentina is that when they make a barbecue, they actually use wood instead of charcoal. So when they cook the meat, it has a slightly different flavor. It's slightly smokier, and that gives it its characteristic feel. The quality of meat in Uruguay is amazing. It's absolutely fantastic, and especially beef is very, very popular. And this reflects the farming tendencies in the country. So there's a lot of agriculture, but they also have very nice vegetables, and poultry and things like that. Another thing that's becoming more and more popular at the moment is Uruguayan wine, especially red wine, and the most popular wine they have is called Tanat. So people have heard of Argentinian wine like Malbec and things like that, but now Uruguayan wine is becoming really popular, and you can even buy it in the supermarkets in England now. So, like I said before, with the language, there's a big influence from Italian due to the Italian migration. There's also a lot of Italian influence in the cuisine. So there's loads of pizza, risotto and pasta that you can find all over the place. And generally, you'll be really impressed with the quality of the food if you go to Uruguay. It's absolutely phenomenal, and they have a really great range. So yeah, if you do go, make sure that you try the barbecue, but also check out some of the Italian food that they have on offer as well. So this leads me on to the third point that I want to talk about, and this is the national drink in Uruguay, which is called Yerba Mate, which is this green powdery drink. I can show you now. So this is a hot drink that's similar to tea, and it's drunk throughout the River Plate region, and also in the south of Brazil, in Paraguay, and also other countries in South America. But Uruguay is the place where it's probably the most popular. And they drink it out of this leather gourd, and in Spanish this is called a calabaza. They use this metal straw to drink it out of like this. It's an acquired taste, I would say. It's got a very woody, earthy flavour to it, and it's quite an unusual flavour actually if you haven't had it before. But it's really popular in Uruguay. People drink it everywhere, so in the parks, in the street, at the beach, and you even see people taking it into shops and restaurants and cafes, which you're not allowed to do in the UK. You can't bring your own drinks in. But also it's a very sociable drink, and people drink it in groups of friends and they share it, and it's also supposed to have a lot of health benefits. So it's got lots of antioxidants, it's a very natural drink, but there are also studies that show that it can help you lose weight, it can help your heart health. So the Uruguayans swear by it, they absolutely love it, they drink it every day. It's like tea here, everybody's absolutely mad about it. So if you go to Uruguay, you should definitely try Yerba Mate because it's a very important part of their culture. So the fourth point I would like to tell you about Uruguay is that they're absolutely mad about football. So like all countries in South America, they're really passionate about football, and they have a long heritage and tradition of playing the sport. So interestingly, Uruguay hosted the first World Cup in 1930, which they won, so the inaugural World Cup. And they also won the World Cup again in 1950. And this is quite interesting because they beat Brazil in the Maracanã Stadium when Brazil were hosting the World Cup. So if you know anything about sort of Brazilian football history, this is a legendary, or should I say notorious game, because Brazil were heavy favourites to win, and the Uruguayans beat them 2-1 in the final in Rio de Janeiro, which was the capital of Brazil at the time. So this was an awful sort of event for Brazilian sports fans because everybody felt like they should have won, and it was a big sort of shame for the country. Football is massive, it's the main sport in Uruguay by a long way. And the two major clubs in the country are called Peñarol and Nacional, and they're both based in Montevideo, in the capital. So if you're a football fan and you enjoy watching football, there will be loads of opportunities for you to go and watch a football match in Uruguay. So the fifth interesting fact about Uruguay is that it has very good gay rights. So gay marriage has been legal in Uruguay since 2013, and also it's legal for gay couples and individuals to adopt children in the country. So this is a really interesting thing because obviously the country is very Roman Catholic, as is the whole of South America, and there are parts of South America that are very conservative and very anti-gay rights. But Uruguay is not like that at all. It's a very gay-friendly country. It's very liberal in general, and it has very modern and progressive laws relating to gay rights. So in general, there's very little discrimination against gay people in Uruguay, and yeah, it's quite a liberal country. And in downtown Montevideo, the capital city, there's actually an area that they've dedicated to diversity. So it's a space, a small square in the downtown area that's been created for diversity. So it obviously shows that the town is very gay friendly and welcoming to gay people. So the sixth interesting fact about Uruguay is that it has the nickname of the Switzerland of South America. So obviously this is all relative, but there are some similarities. Uruguay is considered a very developed country for the region. So for example, it has the highest literacy rate in the whole of South America. It has some of the lowest crime rates, and also it's generally considered to be a very safe country to travel to work in and to live. Like Switzerland, it is also relatively expensive. It's not a cheap country. So some things are relatively cheap. So if you go out for a meal or you're buying food, then that's not bad. But things like staying in hotels, traveling around the country can be quite expensive. So just be aware, just because it's in South America, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's a really cheap place to go to. There are cheap countries in South America like Paraguay, Bolivia, or even Colombia, but Uruguay is not one of those countries. And importantly, the country has a very low level of corruption in compared to other countries. So this means that it welcomes investors from foreign countries to invest and to buy property and things like that. And in general, the economy is relatively stable and they have a good infrastructure. So they have very good internet connections. And like I said, because the crime level is relatively low, it's a very welcoming place to come and do business. So that's something to bear in mind when you go to Uruguay, is that it does have a relatively stable economy. And also the Uruguayan peso is also quite a stable currency. So it's also a really safe country for tourists. Stories about tourists getting mugged or having problems with security are really rare. So if you go there, you won't have any problems about security or safety. You'll feel relaxed and chilled out the whole time you're there. And it is very welcoming for tourists. It's a great place for tourists to go. The seventh point that I want to talk about is the fact that cannabis has been legal to buy from pharmacies in Uruguay since 2013. But it's tightly regulated and it's only for sale for Uruguayan citizens or residents. So it's not like Amsterdam or the Netherlands where anybody can go there and buy cannabis. You have to live there, so there's no tourist trade for the cannabis smoking. Like a lot of places in South America, cannabis was already widespread at the time of legalization. But the main argument that the politicians used was that they wanted to tackle the crime related to drug trafficking. However, the crime rate in Uruguay has gone up significantly since 2013. So it's not clear at the moment if that's to do with drug trafficking, but the argument people were trying to use to legalize the drug was to tackle crime hasn't actually had the effect that it was hoped for. Crime has gone up in recent years. Whilst it is generally well supported, there is also some opposition to the law, and there are people who think that this is a bad idea and it was not a good step for Uruguay. So it's probably a bit early to see whether it has been a success or not, but like I said, most people do support it in the country. If you're interested in this topic, there's actually a cannabis museum that has opened up in Montevideo in 2016. So if this is something you're interested in, you can go to the museum and find out the history of how this law came about. So the eighth point that I want to tell you about is the fact that Uruguay has the seat of Mercosul, so the headquarters of Mercosul is in Montevideo. So Mercosul is a trading bloc that exists in South America, and it includes Brazil, Argentina, Paraguay and Uruguay, and also Venezuela. But Venezuela has been suspended since 2016 because of the political unrest there. And this was a bloc that was created in 1991 at the Treaty of Asuncion. And it's an organization that promotes free trade. And also the citizens who live in those countries can live and work in all of the member states, so they can move freely between the countries. So this is a really important hub for diplomacy and international relations. Uruguay is a really interesting country, and I definitely recommend visiting it, especially Montevideo, which is the capital. It has fantastic architecture and a really nice atmosphere, and is very close to the beach. Probably the most famous landmark in the whole of Montevideo is the Palacio Salvo, which was built in the 1920s and is in the Plaza de Independencia, or the Independence Square. And this is definitely a place that you should check out if you go to Montevideo. And generally speaking, there's a lot of Art Deco and neoclassical architecture throughout the whole city, but there's loads of history and culture there as well. Lots of interesting museums, art galleries, and great places to visit for tourists. So I really hope this has whetted your appetite to go and visit Uruguay. It's such a great country, a great place, and you won't be disappointed if you go there on holiday. If you would like to read a written version of these 8 interesting points about Uruguay, you can have a look at my blog, and I will put a link in the description. So thank you very much for watching. I really appreciate your time. Take care, and I'll speak to you soon. Bye.